And what up, you guys? Welcome back to Pro Publications YouTube channel. It's me, Rich. Daily uploads to open up my own shop. And today, as usual, just taking care of business the way I normally do, getting whatever I gotta get going out, and knocking out some TikTok videos and some YouTube shorts, and really leaning into the idea of like being this anti-fascist comic book curator that's telling people about comic books to both empower as well as enjoyable reads. And that's been fun. And definitely yesterday's reading with Leaf, that's the thing about the black and white comics, they give you so much to think about. Like, for instance, when I finished reading it, I started thinking to myself about how much of the 80s comics and 90s like comics and television like criminalized punk. And then I saw this article that was very interesting, and we should get into that article as well. But first things first, one of the people in the community sent this message out, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that, because I didn't know who this character is. And so as part of the Inktober thing, I'm gonna skip today's prompt and just go off of what the homie sent, which is Axel Press Button. Never heard of this character, but peep this out, right? This is from the Wikipedia page. It says, Axel Press Button is a fictional character appearing in comic books, a violent cyborg with the face of Ernest Borgnine, a button on his chest which delivers orgasmic pleasure when pressed, and a phobia about vegetation. He was created by Steve Moore under the pseudonym Pedro Henry, and Alan Moore, no relation to Stephen Moore, under the pseudonym Kurt Vile. Publisher, Dark Star, Spotlight Publications, Quality Communications, Eclipse Comics, Otimica Press, John Brown Publishing. Like, what the hell is John Brown Publishing? Tell me you guys don't want to see comics from that. And then Marvel Epic. So it did the rounds. It's a creator owned, so it's literally owned by Alan Moore and Steve Moore. And so weird that there's no relation, because I literally, when I saw that, I thought that was his brother, because he also has a brother that does comics. But then that takes me down to another rabbit hole of John Brown Media. So let's peep this out, right? It says, John Brown Media is one of the world's largest content marketing agencies. It was bought by Dentsu Aegis in May 2015. While originally formed as a magazine company, the company creates multi-channel content for various brands with services including social media, film, and audio mobile. So it sounds like it used to be a magazine, but not no more. But nonetheless, now I want to see what those John Brown magazines look like. But nonetheless, here is the throwdown in the blue line. So that's what the blue line looks like. And then after that, here's what the character looks like online. And now I'm gonna go ahead and throw the inks down on that. So that was fun. It was fun to do this character. Definitely want to check to see if Alan Moore and Steve Moore have this still licensed. If not, it'd be fun to hunt down and maybe do my own fan comic. But peep this art out here, you guys. This is the character the way I came up with it. I definitely like this character design. I like these big ass feet that they gave him. I don't understand the button thing, but it's all good. This character design is fire. So good on Steve Moore or Alan Moore, whoever designed the character. But beyond that, man, so some of the reading that I did about the punk, some of it it's so strange, because one article that I read was about how punk definitely embrace crime and we're out trying to commit lewd acts as a way of being defiant against the state and the system. I don't think that to be too far from the truth, but that one was someone just like retrospective of their past punk life, right? So it was like a blog. But then I read an article that was more like peer reviewed, and so it was in a professional setting, and their claim is that punk actually was criminalized because it had such a anti-fascist, anti-authoritarian approach to everything, and it was also non-commercial. Like, a lot of the punk stuff that I always liked was this do-it-yourself attitude, right? Zines was one of those things of like, punk bands used to write down the lyrics to their songs and hand out these one-page zines at backyard shows and stuff, right? And that was my first introduction to zines. And then I saw people doing screen printing and making patches at home and things like that. And so like there was this sentiment of like anti-establishment, right? anti-authoritarian, anti-fascist, as well as this idea of like non-commercialization of punk. And because of all those reasons, it was like mainstream media attacked punk, criminalized punk. They didn't want kids to grow up to be punks because they felt like punks would destroy the system. And I think we've always been trying to destroy the system, right? And so I just thought that was really interesting. And it goes to show you, like, you never know, like, just your day-to-day life. Like, so, like, for instance, I heard a saying that everything we do is political. Every action and inaction that we take makes a statement, right? It's propaganda of the self. The way we carry ourselves throughout life advocates for or against something, right? And I think that for the most part, punk as just a state of mind, as an art movement, right? It is a culture of resistance. It is a culture of disobeying, powers that be, of always trying to subvert what most people just consume as like the law of the land, and always trying to live outside of the box, and whatever box that might be, right? So, like, for instance, if you ever seen Salt Lake City Punkers, that movie, there's a punk who's super hardcore, who's very nerdy, and is like an oceanographer, and like that's punk, right? Or people's assertion of like, when the world is cruel, to be kind is being punk, right? The idea is that we will always reside and live with the minority. So like punk is very powerful in that way, and so it makes sense that they try to criminalize it. And I think about how like punks all identified as queer in the 80s and the 90s, and that was because of Thatcher in the UK. And this is me paraphrasing stuff that I've read prior to this conversation, but it was this idea that like the punks would go out at night, and so would queer folks, and Thatcher would have like police like trying to round up punks and queer folks. And so like this like bond between punks and queer community was formed and shaped, and like that's why even to this day, like, we got each other's back, you know what I mean? And like it's cool to see the youth nowadays talking about punk, because like for a while, like I would tell people like I like punk, and like nobody really, like, they didn't vibe with it, So here goes some stuff right here from online, right? It says the relationship between punk and queer culture in the UK is a deep and often complicated history, characterized by shared anti-establishment attitudes, radical experimentation with gender and sexuality, and the creation of alternative DIY spaces. It says gender play and transgression. Early UK punk was inherently queer in its aesthetic. The fashion championed by designers like openly appropriated elements of bondage, S&M, and fetish wear. This radical subversion of traditional gender norms and respectable attire made punk an early space for non-conformity. A gay scene influence. The early punk movement in London was influenced by and sometimes socialized in local gay clubs in the mid-1970s. This crossover exposed the burgeoning punk scene to a more radical politics of sexual identity than was common in the mainstream. And then you have some key figures like Jane County and Pete Shelley of the Buzzcocks. Going back to that Buzzcock zine, probably review that tomorrow. And it says accessibility. Unlike the increasingly technical and expensive rock music of the time, punk's raw simplicity made it accessible. This meant women, working class youth, and queer people could pick up instruments and express themselves without needing mainstream's approval or resources. Fanzine. The DIY media of punk, particularly fanzines like the legendary Sniffing Glue, provided an uncensored space to discuss politics, sexuality, and identity issues that were suppressed by mainstream media. This helped arm young queer people with knowledge and validation. The shift and the rise of queercore. Mid-80s macho shift. As the 1980s progressed, a strain of hardcore punk and oi music in the UK and US became increasingly associated with a more macho, sometimes homophobic, and even racist element. This led to a policing of gender expression within the scene and pushed many queer and feminist punks to the margins. Queercore. In response to this exclusion, the queercore movement was born in the mid-1980s. While primarily starting in North America with zines like JD's, the movement had a parallel influence in the UK. Queercore combined the radical anti-establishment politics of punk with an explicitly anti-heteronormative and often anti-assimilationist politics to create an international space for queer people. UK queer punk spaces. This led to the formation of explicitly queer-friendly spaces and clubs in the late 1980s and early 1990s, such as the first alternative gay club, Rock and Doris in Newcastle, and other London clubs like Homo Crime. In summary, punk in the UK was a crucial catalyst, providing a template for cultural rebellion and a crucial space for the development of queer identity and community. Even if that space was sometimes contested and required queer punks to actively carve out their own dedicated subspaces. So, one of the books that I read was also about how Thatcher would have people like going around trying to round up punks and queer, and like we banded together and we would like fucking brawl with these cops that were trying to fuck with both of us. So here goes kind of what Thatcher was doing to the queer folks, right? It says, harassment of queer folks, section 28. The most direct and damaging piece of legislation targeting the queer community was section 28, which was prohibited local authorities from intentionally promoting homosexuality or publishing material with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Right? And so that's where kind of like the zines and all that stuff kind of pops up, right? And for the punks, it was political antagonism. Thatcher became the primary supervillain for the UK's protest music scene. Bands like The Specials, The English Beat, and especially anarcho-punk groups like Crass made Thatcherism the focus of their creative output. The Crass Thatchergate incident, anarcho-punk band Crass produced a fake tape splicing together recordings of Thatcher and Ronald Reagan to make it sound like they were arguing over the Falklands and the possibility of nuclear war. The classified government documents revealed that the Foreign Office, M16, and even Thatcher herself were so concerned about the tape, fearing it was a sophisticated Soviet-Argentinian intelligence plot, that they launched an official investigation demonstrating the extent of state paranoia and scrutiny directed at the anti-government subculture, policing of protesters and protest music, as well as protest publications. And so like all that pressure just created this like commonality, but it never ceases to amaze me how much like macho bullshit can infiltrate itself into like safe spaces, right? I think about like the skate community. Like for the longest time, skateboarders, like we were just chill fucking people. Like it was just like show up, let's skate, like we didn't give a fuck, right? And like I feel like in the like 2000s, it was like as soon as like Red Bull and like all this other shit got involved with skateboarding, it became like this extreme sport, and so it became like this macho sport. And so like there's always gonna be that bullshit just like lingering somewhere to fucking like destroy our spaces. But again, that's why we have to be participators and not spectators, right? We need to maintain the communities we want to be a part of and like really like foster that goodwill between us. And it's crazy, right? Because all these thoughts and like this random hole I went into all came about because I read a dollar bin comic yesterday. Life is good, man. But alright, you guys, that's all I got for you guys today. As always, please like, share, subscribe, and I do this shit daily. So guess what? Your boy will be back tomorrow with more rants about more punk and more comics and more skating. Alright? Alright, you guys, I'll see you then. Lates.